Hello friends, I am Shivaji Bhaskar, Faculty of Russian at the School of Foreign Languages, IGNOU. I welcome you all to this course, Basics of Russian Communication Skills Part 1. If you remember that we have already discussed about various aspects of the Russian grammar and phonetics. Some of the important aspects like the case system in Russian we have briefly touched upon. Now, since we have been talking about how do the verb play an important role in the construction of a sentence, and specifically we have seen how to conjugate different verbs of Russian language. In our previous module, we have briefly touched upon the verbs of motion or glagoli движения because it is as important as any other aspect of the Russian grammar in order to give meaning to our sentences. So, as we know that verbs of motion are basically such verbs which defines the movement, and then we have different kind of verbs depending upon the context and situation we use them. However, we started our discussion with ichi and khajij, which means unidirection and multidirection. Now we will be discussing about these verbs, about how and when to use and what kind of meaning do they give in a particular sentence. Alright, as we know that verbs of motion or glagoli движения, these are the verbs which indicate movement, and as we know that movement can be unidirection or multidirection. So, depending upon these two aspects we use different set of verbs. So, for a very brief information, we have such verbs like ichi and yekhach, they belong to the first group, whereas we have khajij and yezdij, they belong to the other. However, the meaning remains same. Ichi is a unidirection, whereas khajij is a multidirection. The only difference is ichi means to go on foot in a unidirection, whereas yekhach means to go by transport again in a unidirection. When we talk about khajij and yezdij, khajij means to go on foot in multidirection, whereas yezdij means to go by transport but in multidirection as well. So, this is the basic concept about these two groups of verbs which we use in verbs of motion. Now, we will be discussing about them in details. So, now let us go ahead and pay attention to some of the important verbs. As you already know, ichi and yekhach. Now, let us quickly conjugate them so that you already know that how to use them in sentences, but since it is important to know how they are being conjugated so that you can particularly use with the personal pronouns in order to explain them further. So, ichi я иду, ты идешь, он она идет, мы идем, вы идете, and они идут. Alright. We shall be discussing about these verbs in different conjugation with certain more examples in a dedicated session on verbs of motion. But however, before that we would like to prepare you well in advance that this aspect in Russian is very important, and you can see and learn this with the help of a few examples. So, the second one is yekhach, means to go by transport in a unidirection. So, yekhach, я еду, ты едешь, он она едет, мы едем, вы едете, and они едут. So, these kind of constructions you also must know how and when to use, and since if you remember in our previous module we have talked about the usage of где, and in this context, because the question we frame with the help of verbs of motion is куда, where to. So, it gives a uni or a multi-direction, it indicates to a particular movement. So, that is why it is important. Then you have the second set of verbs is khajij and yezdij. You will be learning about them in details in the dedicated session. Till now you only need to remember the basic difference that ichi and yekhach is unidirection, whereas khajij and yezdij is multi-direction. Alright, hope this concept is clear. Now, we shall go ahead and see some of the important aspect of this particular concept of glagoli движения. Okay, now we will go ahead. So, the both verbs yekhach and yezdij indicate movement by transport. However, yekhach denotes movement by transport in a particular direction, whereas yezdij signifies either to and fro movement or movement in multiple directions. This we already know. Same is the case with ichi and yekhach. Alright, so this concept is clear. Now I would like to explain it further with the help of a few examples. So please pay attention. I would like to take the first example with ye khaj, because we in previous module discussed about the usage of ichi and khajich. For example, moi brat idiot na stadion. So he is going to the stadium once. So that is why we said in on idiot. When I am using khajich, I can use moi brat khojit na stadion каждое утро. So he goes to the stadium every morning. So it is a to and fro and multiple direction. So that is why we have used the particular verb khajich, and we have indicated it with the construction of the sentence as well. Now in this example, you see we have used the verb ye khaj. Куда вы едете? Where are you going? So this is a question of the verbs of motion. So answer could be ya yedu center. Here you can see the preposition verb has been used, but when we use preposition in case of glagoli движения, the ending of the noun does not change as we have seen in the prepositional case. So this is the basic difference again between prepositional case and in case of usage of glagoli движения. So the answer is ya yedu center. Kuda vi jedete? Where are you going? Ya yedu, I am going center, to the center of the city. If you want to use center of the city, you can say ya yedu center gorada, center of the city. So you can construct more sentences like that. However, you will be learning about them in your dedicated modules when we talk about different case system, like different cases of the Russian language. Alright, now let's go ahead. Here you can pay attention to this particular example. Сегодня воскресенье, today is Sunday. Люди ездят на разные места. So here we have used the construction, the verb ездить in plural form, in ani form. Люди ездят. Куда они ездят? Они ездят на разные места. So they are going to different places. So when they are going to different places is multi-direction. So that is why, of course, we have used the second group of the verbs of motion, in this case ездить, in the conjugated form of они, люди. Alright. So today is Sunday. Люди ездят на разные места. Сегодня воскресенье. Куда люди ездят? Сегодня воскресенье. Люди ездят на разные места. So you can also replace места from any other noun you wish. However, the meaning of the sentence must be around the glagoli движения, so that we understand that we are using the verbs of motion. Alright, now let's go ahead. Here, this is very important to remember that expressions like каждый день, часто, иногда. Каждый день we know every day, часто means oftenly, иногда means sometimes. Whenever we have such expressions which indicate repetitive to and from motion, hence the verbs of motion belonging to the group 2 are being used. So it's clear when do we use group 2 verbs, especially when we have to and fro or multiple direction movement. So we have certain expressions like каждый день, часто, иногда. These are some indications that when to use the second group of verbs of motion. So it would be absolutely clear for you to use that particular verb in that case. So now let's pay attention to a few examples. Иногда мой брат ходит на выставку. Иногда means sometimes. Мой брат, my brother, ходит, goes на выставку, to the exhibition. So here we have used the second group ходить because it's иногда, and каждый день, every day, он ездит в центр. Every day he goes to the center. So now we have learned about certain expressions like каждый день, часто and иногда, which actually means that the movement is repetitive, to and fro and multi-direction. So the verbs of motion belonging to group 2 like ходить and ездить will be used. and we have seen two examples like inakda moi brat khojit na výstavku and Kashdijien on Yezid center. If you pay attention to the ending of the noun výstavka changes into výstavku. Why? There is a particular rule of grammar in Russian that any noun of the feminine gender changes into u. So whichever is ending with a changes into u, and if it is ya, it will change into u. You will be knowing about it further in the dedicated modules. However, till now I would like to request you to prepare yourself in advance for understanding such concepts. And the second sentence we have just did is Kashdijien on Yezid center. So every day he goes to the center. Here you can use center gorada, and in place of center you can also use universitet, stadion. But however, whenever we have stadion, then you have to replace the predlog or the preposition from va to na, so that he goes to the stadium. It is a fixed rule in Russian. So now we will go ahead, and here we would like to tell you that there is a session expressions like сейчас, which means now, indicates a movement in a particular direction, and verbs of motion belonging to group 1 are used. How? Because it is an expression of right now. So whenever you use сейчас, then you have to use the verb like идти and ехать. Сейчас я иду на почту. Here again you can see that we have used сейчас with the first group of the verbs of motion like идти in a conjugated form for я. Like сейчас я иду на почту. Here if you pay attention to the ending of the noun почта ends with a, changes into u. However, you will be learning about this in a dedicated session. Now we'll pay attention to the next sentence. Мой брат сейчас едет. Куда он едет? Он едет в центр. So you can also replace it with any other word. For example, in place of center, I would like to use университет. Мой брат сейчас едет в университет. So here you can see that when in glagoli движения, the ending of the masculine gender noun does not change. Alright, so this is another concept you will be learning about in a dedicated module of glagoli движения. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to the conjugation of some of the verbs which we know like ichi and khajich, and let's see how with the help of these personal pronouns they are being changed. Personal pronouns we already know. Ya, tu, on, ana, mui, we, ani means I, you singular. On, he, ana, she, mui means we means you plural, and ani means they. So let's pay attention to the conjugation of these verbs while I conjugate quickly for you. Я иду, ты идешь, он, она идет, мы идем, вы идете, они идут. Whereas in place of ходить, я хожу, ты ходишь, он, она ходит, мы ходим, вы ходите, они ходят. Okay, I hope the conjugation is clear to you. We would like also to recommend you to pay attention to these conjugation and use them frequently in your own sentences in order to communicate in Russian efficiently. Alright, now let's go ahead. Here we would like to tell you that whenever we have any form of verb, we also have the past tense forms. In case of ichi and khajich, we do have the past tense form. However, you will be learning about them in a dedicated session. But here I would like to briefly touch upon that how ichi can be changed into as per the gender of the noun. If it is masculine, then shol. If it is feminine, then shla. And if it is plural, then shli. And we have one example for each. For example, for shol, ya shol, I went, ti shol, you went, and on shol, he went. So like this in the case of feminine gender as well. Ya shla, I went. Then when there is a female saying that she went, so ya shla, ti shla, on shla. And for plural, they went, мы шли, we went, you went plural, and they went, it's они шли. So like this, you can also prepare it and note it down in your notebooks in order to prepare yourself in advance for the glagoli движения. Till now with the examples, the limited examples which we are using in this module, you can also think of more such context where you can use these verbs of motion in present tense as well as in past tense like we just did. However, in details you will be learning about them in the upcoming modules. Now let's go ahead. Here we will see that how khajij is being conjugated in past form. So as per masculine, feminine and plural, how do we change it? We change from khajij to khajil, on khajil, ya khajil. If we have ana, ana khajila. If we have ani, ani khajili. So I hope this concept is absolutely clear to you. It's very simple. Whenever you have the masculine gender, it is khajil, feminine is khajila and plural khajili. In the case of ichi, on shol, anashla, anishli. Alright. Okay, now let's go ahead. Here, now we will quickly conjugate the second verb section where we are going to take ye khaj and ye sij. Alright. So first thing has to be very clear that the first group is ichi and ye khaj. Means unidirection. Khajij and ye sij means multi-direction. However, for the convenience only we are conjugating them together, but they belong to different two groups. So please pay attention to the conjugation while I quickly conjugate it for you. Я еду, ты едешь, он, она едет, мы едем, вы едете, они едут. Ездить, я езжу, ты едешь, он, она едет, мы едем, вы едете, они ездят. So this is the basic difference. You would absolutely be able to master it with multiple exercises and multiple examples which we are going to give you in a detailed and dedicated module. However, before that your task is to prepare yourself with the conjugation, try to revise it as many as times you can and then put some examples as we are doing it here. Okay, now let's go ahead and pay attention to very simple kind of a collection of sentences where you will see the usage of different forms of verbs of motion in conjugated forms. For example, we are going to use yejit and yekhaj. So we have the first one is letam. In summer, мы едем, we go. Ukraину. So Ukraine is Ukraine. Куда мы едем? Мы едем в Украину. So we go to Ukraine. Когда? When? Летом. Летом. So in summer we go to Ukraine. The second one is воскресенье мы едем за город. Sunday we go to Zagreb. So here we will take a few examples in order to understand the usage of glagoli dvizhenya. We are going to take the verb like yekhaj and yezdij. So please pay attention to the first sentence. Letam мы едем в Москву. In summer we go to Moscow. So куда мы едем? Where do we go? Мы едем в Москву. So we go to Moscow. Since Moscow ends with a, Moskva, so it changes into Moskvu, Moskvu. Likewise, you can also change the other such important words which are of feminine gender, ends with a into u. The second one, воскресенье мы едем за город. Воскресенье мы едем за город. So on Sunday we go to outside the city, за город. The third one is каждое лето, every summer. So every, what do we understand? That we have to use the second group of verbs which is to and fro multi-direction. So каждое лето, every summer мы едем в Украину. So every summer we go to Ukraine. So the next sentence is каждое лето мы едем в Москву. So here we are using the expression каждое, which actually tells us that we have to use the verb which indicates to and fro or multiple direction movement. So we have ездить. Каждое лето мы едем. Каждое лето, every summer, мы ездим, we go to Moscow. And then the last one is Каждое воскресенье мы едем за город. So every Sunday we go outside this city. So these kind of construction, depending upon the usage of expressions like каждое, you can use in your own expression, in your own sentences, while keeping in mind the importance of group 1 or group 2 of verbs of motion. Okay, now let's go ahead and pay attention to the past form of yekhach and yezdich. So yekhach changes into yekhal if masculine, yekhala if feminine, and yekhali if plural. Okay, so you can also use with personal pronouns. Ya yekhal, ty yekhal, on yekhal, ya yekhala, ty yekhala, ana yekhala, and yekhali you can use with mui yekhali, vui yekhali, ani yekhali, because all three are in plural form. Okay, now let's go ahead and pay attention to the past form of yezdich. So ya yezdil, ty yezdila, ani yezdili. Ya yezdil, ty yezdil, on yezdil. Yezdila feminine gender, ya yezdila, ty yezdila, ana yezdila. If it is mui, vui or ani, it will be mui yezdili, vui yezdili, and ani yezdili. So I hope these two concepts are absolutely clear. Ichi, yekhach, khajich and yezdich in conjugated form as well as in the form which we just discussed in the past form. However, it is very simple to understand. However, you can use them with certain example. Okay, so now we will go ahead and pay attention to some expressions where we are going to use the question kuda, which means where to. However, in the nominative case, we have touched upon the simple sentences which we ask with the help of что это, what is this, and in this case we are going to ask the question first in что это, and then we will also going to ask the same question in the form of куда. Что это? Это музей. What is this? This is museum. And if I want to ask the same question in the form of куда, I would say Я иду в музей. Куда ты идешь? Where are you going? Я иду в музей. I am going to the museum. Now the next question is это город. This is city. Что это? Это город. You can also use куда. Куда мы идем? Where are we going? Мы идем в город. Мы идем в город. So these are masculine gender nouns like музей, город, and the next one is санаторий. The ending would not change. You can see very clearly. And the third question I am going to ask is что это? Это санаторий. Куда он часто ходит? Он часто ходит в санаторий. So санаторий in the что это form as well as in the kuda form remains same. So this is the basic concept which you need to remember. However, with the verbs of motion in a conjugated form, if it is masculine gender word with hard ending or with ikratki, it does not change. Alright, so the next set of sentences we will see that how the other forms of such nouns changes. So we'll go ahead. Here you can see that if we have neuter gender like министерство, посольство или общежитие, министерство means ministry, посольство means embassy, общежитие we know means hostel, it remains same. Like каждый день он ходит куда? В министерство. Туристы часто ходят куда? Посольство. Сейчас я иду куда? В общежитие. So the ending remains same, the noun remains same. However, question changes from что это to куда. So I hope this concept is absolutely clear to you all now. Now let's read the sentences once again before we go ahead. Это министерство. Что это? Это министерство. Что это? Это посольство. Что это? Это общежитие. Then we will ask the question in the form of куда and we'll answer it. Каждый день он ходит в министерство. Куда он ходит каждый день? And the expression каждый день is repetitive movement. So we will choose a verb of motion from the group 2, like in this case, ходить. Каждый день он ходит в министерство. Куда он ходит каждый день? Каждый день он ходит в министерство. You can also use мой брат каждый день ходит в министерство. Then we have the second one. Туристы часто ходят в посольство. Куда туристы ходят часто? Туристы часто ходят в посольство in form of куда. Now the last one we have. Сейчас я иду в общежитие. Right now I am going to my or hostel. Сейчас we know that it is the group 1 because сейчас is one movement in a particular direction. So сейчас куда я иду? Я иду в общежитие. So with the help of expressions and with the help of this group 1 and group 2 forms of verbs of motion in a conjugated form, you have learned that how we change them as required by the sentence. Alright, okay. Now let's go ahead and pay attention to some of the questions where we will again use что это and куда. Now we will take some examples of feminine gender. We have words like библиотека and деревня. Что это? Это библиотека. Куда? Вечером я хожу в библиотеку. Here you can see that the библиотека's ending has been changed to библиотеку. So вечером я хожу. Where do I go? In the evening, I go to the library. Вечером я хожу в библиотеку. In case of the second sentence, we have что это? Это деревня. Сейчас мы едем в деревню. So ending of the noun, which is of feminine gender, which ends with ya, changes into you. Деревня changes into you. Деревню. Куда? Деревню. Куда он ходит? Он ходит в деревню. Куда мы едем в деревню. Сейчас мы едем в деревню. Сейчас means it's a unidirection. Куда мы едем в деревню. So in this case as well, you can use this noun as well as in a conjugated form of verbs of motion, ехать, and then change it as required by the sentence or the context. Alright, now let's go ahead and pay attention to a small text we will have in order to understand the basics of verbs of motion. I'll quickly discuss this text with you so that we have a fair idea about the basics of Glagoli Dvishenya. So please pay attention to the text. So in this module we have discussed about the verbs of motion. Initially we talked about ichi yekhach. They belong to the group 1, which has the meaning that we go to in a particular direction. Whereas in the group 2 we talked about khajich and yezdich, which means a repetitive to and fro as well as multiple direction. And then we have discussed their usage in the form of sentences. Next, if you see that we have used certain examples. For the case of yekhaj, we have used a construction of a sentence. For example, kuda vi jedite, we answered it with ya yedu sentar. So with the help of these kind of sentences, you can also prepare your own sentences. So in order to comprehend the usage of verbs of motion for the basic level, it is absolutely essential to use certain kind of verbs, certain kind of nouns, and then prepare and construct your own sentences. And then we have discussed another verb, ездить, in a conjugated form, like сегодня воскресенье люди ездят на разные места. Here we also using the conjugated form of ездить for они. Они means you, люди in this case. Люди ездят на разные места. So you can also prepare your own sentences based on that, where we are going to use the verb for multiple direction. And then if you pay attention that we have discussed about certain expressions like kash dijiye, chasta, inagda, etc., which actually means that we have to use the verbs of motion where we would like to tell and inform that it is to and fro, multiple direction or repetitive. For example, we have used a few examples like inagda, moi brat khojet na vistavku. So sometimes my brother goes to the exhibition. So khojet, again we know that it is from the group 2 of the verbs of motion, as well as for kash dijiye we have used kash dijiye own. You can also replace it with my brother or moi brat yezit sentar. And then we have used the feminine gender nouns like pochta, and we little bit touched upon that how the ending of such nouns change, like sichas yaidu na pochtu. So kuda ya sichas idu yaidu na pochtu. And then we conjugated quickly how the verbs like ichi and khajij are being conjugated. You can listen to and you can pay attention to such verb conjugations which we already done. So I hope with the help of these conjugated forms of verbs of motion you can prepare your own sentences. And then with the help of many other examples, we talked about the past form of these verbs in singular form, male female, as well as in plural form. So you can also prepare a list of such words in this form and try to prepare your own words. And finally, we discuss about the usage of many other concepts of verbs of motion, but however, as we already discussed, that you will be learning about them in detail in the dedicated session. Till now, I think this concept is absolutely clear to you now. I hope you all enjoyed this module. We'll be discussing about more such important concepts like verbs of motion in the upcoming module. Thank you.